This week I was invited by Megan Smith of the Napanee Chamber of Commerce to speak at the Napanee Sales and Marketing Club meeting. We had a very nice turnout and I had an opportunity to talk on the subject of building the lifetime value of a client. We also explored the psychological triggers needed in your sales copy, either on your website or in your social media or any of your other marketing messages, so people understand why your business is the obvious alternative at the exact moment they're ready to buy. Welcome to the Zero Noise Marketing Podcast.
Well, good morning, everyone. This is great. Full house, our second sales and marketing meeting, club. It's a chance for you guys to learn. So thank you very much for coming. This morning we have Jason Tanner here. Jason's going to speak about how to bring customers value. So I'm excited to hear about that. And if you have any questions or answers afterwards, he will answer them. So we'll be about, how long, half an hour? 40
Until
minutes?
you tell me to stop.
Okay,
Yeah.
Perfect, wonderful.
Whoever's got to watch can start waving. Sam could start waving uncontrollably there at minute 25. Okay. Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Jason Tanner, and I hail from the Napanee Marketing Group. So what we're going to talk about today is thinking about the maximization of value to a customer. And some of this stuff is kind of obvious if you think about how you're already delivering value to customers. So a customer will purchase your product or service and you deliver them something. If you run a retail business, then you have a very natural spectrum of products or services ranging from the inexpensive all the way up to the deluxe item that maybe very few people buy, but it's available. So there's kind of an obvious way that we deliver value. And what we're going to be talking today is a little bit about the ways that are not so obvious. And there's a lot of emphasis put on social media and creating content for our customers, but it's not often framed as an extension of our value spectrum, from an item that has perhaps no money being exchanged all the way up to our smallest transaction, and then all the way up to our large transaction. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and just how to do that so that you're not doing things that are ineffective and burning a lot of energy while you're creating all of this content. You're doing something that actually contributes to how the prospect thinks about you when they are ready to purchase. So as I mentioned, a department store has a natural spectrum of products and services, and they leverage those by sometimes even selling them below cost just to get your attention and just to initiate that first transaction. And the first transaction, whatever it is the most expensive usually, unless you've been referred by somebody.
When you say that, do you mean from a marketing perspective?
Yes, what you pay for that first transaction. So, thank you, Brad. So if you pay whatever it is that you paid for your advertising, and whatever that was brings in 5 people, you just do the simple math and divide out the cost of your advertising over the 5 new customers. That first transaction is expensive, right? So we're trying to make that customer more valuable. You're naturally trying to move them into a second transaction, which may be identical to the first, but the cost of the second transaction is significantly lower because you already have some relationship with them. And the question is, how do you initiate that second transaction? Well, we have to create opportunities to do that. Our friends at the grocery store do not make direct contact with individuals unless they have some sort of a points club or something like that. They simply spray us with flyers. Everybody who has a strong pulse in a mailbox gets a flyer. and that's their big criteria. And so they're able to create multiple transactions from us and build habits over months and years, and that model works very, very well. But those of us who are not in a general market like that need to do something very specific. And we need to create a little herd of people who have initiated some sort of initial transaction with us, so that we can move through all of the other areas and maximize the value and lower the cost of doing business with our customers over time. Because we can't just live on, it would be impossible to just do one-offs all the time. People we've never heard of do one transaction and then move on in most cases. So what do we do in the buying cycle of the customer is, say, 6 months or a year or 5 years. What can we do with them to provide meaningful contact so that they're thinking of you when the time comes? In some businesses, think of car dealerships, for instance, we don't know when the customer is going to be ready. They just sort of pop up one day, and you cross your fingers and you hope that they're going to be thinking about you and favoring your particular option and ready to buy all at the same time. And that's really, really tricky. There's a famous car salesman, Joe Girard. You heard of Joe Girard?
Yes.
Yes. Joe holds the Guinness Book of World Records as the seller of the most cars in a year. Between 1963 and 1978, Joe held that record. He sold 13,000 cars between those years down in Detroit. And you know what Joe's magic bullet was? Has anyone heard this?
I think it's staying in touch. He was always sending thank you cards.
Right, yeah. He sent out thank you cards, little hello cards, and on the front of every single one of them, he had 3 little words. He said, "I like you," and then the person's address and everything. Then the magic of it was that each of them looked different. Like, if you were getting one of these every month, it wouldn't look the same as the one you got last month. And they would be handwritten, and so they felt personal. So Joe was creating these direct relationships with all these people who he had had any kind of contact with. And Joe knew that he had no way of knowing when they were going to be ready. When is the transmission going to die on the one you're driving? You know, when are you going to be feeling most motivated to move forward? So he knew that relationship had to be maintained over time. The other thing that we can unpack from Joe's example is that you can almost send anything as long as it's relevant and personal. It doesn't have to be, revolutionary every single time. Joe would send out the "I like you" message, and when you opened it up, there would be some sort of a seasonal greeting or something along those lines, but it would be personalized. So you really did feel like Joe was reaching out to you. And even if you have the presence of mind to understand that there were probably 12,999 other people getting a very similar message at the same time, it's still kind of nice. There's a mortgage broker, Sean Donahue. Him and his dad, Wally, actually do this. Once a year, I still get a birthday card from them. The only one. But that's beside the point. But but they have no idea when your mortgage is going to renew necessarily, unless they keep meticulous records and they arrange the last mortgage. So while it seems like maybe a scattershot approach, it's a very simple strategy for keeping people on top of your mind. And of course, in the internet age, do we need to necessarily send out printed material? Well, obviously not. But the trick with something we do online is that it does need to seem personal somehow. So how do you make an online message on, let's say, a Facebook post or a Twitter blast or something like that, or even an email, seem like it's personal? Well, it all comes down to the relevance of the message. So when you're doing some sort of a social media outreach, there has to be a kind of a deep understanding of what the customer is actually going through. Now, I'm talking very generally here because I don't know what businesses everyone is in, but there's so we're talking high level and we're talking about broad principles here, so I apologize about that. I'm going to try and leave some room for questions at the end here so that if you have specific questions about your situation, we can talk about that a little bit. So the one consideration is that it has to feel as though you have a deep and almost uncanny understanding of their situation. And when you have that, it's easier to come up with ideas for your social media or your email outreach that actually is interesting to them. May not be directly related to what it is that you're selling. It may be indirectly related or complementary. One of my customers makes these beautiful handmade wooden bowls, from like a little 8-inch bowl all the way up to a 20-inch bowl, and they really are beautiful. And one of the things that we're starting to explore is the things that the customers are also interested in. So if you are the kind of person who is building a home and is trying to furnish it with real authentic housewares like this, maybe you entertain a lot. Maybe you'd like to know how to make 5 or 6 different salads that you've never made before to go into this giant salad bowl. Certainly we've talked about how to do maintenance on similar wooden bowls and structures. So our reasoning here is that if someone is an ideal customer for us, it may not be someone who has never bought a wooden bowl before. So if someone has a bunch of wooden products in their home already, they'd like to know how to make them last a lifetime. So we're currently doing a bunch of education around that so that we can help support people's habit. And of course, that as a first step, as a zero cost transaction of value where they don't pay anything but they do get value in exchange, it's a good first step on a value ladder all the way up to their most expensive product, which is like a $1,300 set of bowls, which is like a almost Russian doll arrangement with your 21-inch bowl on the outside stacked all the way up to the little bowl in the middle. And so they can go all the way up. So how do we do that with your business? So I'm going to go through a list of 9 different things that you can think about when you're creating content on your site, so that on your website or in your social media, so that when people are ready to buy, whenever that's going to be, they will already have been exposed to a body of information that will make them much more likely to buy from you. So it's structured as a thesis. You remember when we were writing essays in school? You tried to come up with a top-level thesis, and then you created a whole bunch of supportive arguments all the way down. So we have a structure for developing that, and our thesis statement is that I am the absolute best person for my ideal customer to do business with. That's your thesis statement. And so everything else that we do from here on in supports that. And hopefully we're not doing that in a heavy-handed way so that people know you're selling to them. The gold standard for this is that you can do it invisibly. When you're delivering sales messages and messages of influence, if you can do it in such a way that people feel like they're being delivered value, and because they are, it'll be much more effective than being heavy-handed. You can't actually say your thesis statement. You put that message right on the front page of your website. It will have no effect at all because it's too on the nose. So we have to kind of sneak up on it. So here's the first one. I'm here and I'm serving your community. Again, that's ham-fisted and direct, but what we want to do is put things in our social media that implicitly demonstrate that that's what you're doing. So perhaps you talk about heading on down to the chamber meeting where you're volunteering or whatever it is that you're naturally doing. You may want to look at some of the stuff that you're already doing and find ways to kind of humbly and modestly talk about that. One of the things you can do is promote organizations that you feel strongly about. That will put the attention on them, and that in volunteering your time to put the spotlight on a volunteer organization that is kind of congruent with the values of the person you're trying to reach out with. It naturally associates you with that. You can go as far as you want with that. In fact, if you have a podcast or something along that line and you interview your biggest competitor, it may sound like a terrible, terrible idea, but the implication is that you as an authority have initiated a conversation and allowed this person into it, which makes them subordinate to you in some way, especially if you're driving the conversation and asking all the questions. So it's counterintuitive, some of these approaches here. So our number 2 statement here that we're going to support is, I am likable and knowledgeable. And so Robert L. Shook interviewed Joe Girard, who we talked about earlier in his book, 10 Greatest Salespeople. And Joe Girard said, I have no big secrets which nobody else has. And he smiles and says, I simply sell the world's greatest product. That's it. I sell Joe Girard. So if Joe had gone out there and walked around with a t-shirt that said, Joe Girard is the world's greatest product, first of all, they would have locked him up. But he lived his life and interacted with prospects as though that were true. And when you go online and talk or put out a message, and it's friendly and it's generous and it demonstrates your knowledge and it demonstrates your interest in others, again, what does that say about you implicitly? So there's always a sort of a yin and a yang in your marketing message, and you want to focus on the implicit, and that's where your action lives. And the explicit message is the thing that implicitly implies the stuff that we're talking here. So, for instance, if you wanted to, rather than say, I know a lot about this subject, well, you could say that, but it's too on the nose, isn't it? Instead, why don't you talk about the subject and say things that are insightful and that build confidence? So that's the explicit action that implicitly implies the point that we're trying to make in our body, our thesis body here. So here's number 3. I resemble you in some way. People like to deal with people who look like them or who resemble them. And back to our car dealership example, one of the things I'm always trying to talk my car dealership customers into is to getting each and every one of their salespeople in a video on the website just talking about whatever. It doesn't even matter. Because they've got a pantheon of characters in every car dealership, and there's usually one there to match every potential type of customer. You've got the mother of 2 who's in her late 30s. You've got the old war horse with all the rings on his fingers, and he's been selling cars for 40 years, and he's a bit of a card, and if he's not careful, he might say something racist, and you've got everybody in between. And if you have those people out there, and you have kind of a spectrum of personalities, there's going to be someone who reminds you of yourself. And that's who you're going to instinctively be drawn towards. So if there's only one of you in your business, you can leverage the fact that you have a face, basically, and a personality, and it's unique by putting it out there, and at least standing a better chance of attracting people who are reminded of themselves when they look at you. And it might be your personality, it might be your interests, and you want to get all of those out there. It might seem a little bit loosey-goosey, for instance, to get on there and talk about the yachting club that you belong to, or the ski club, or the chess club, or whatever it is that you do. But you have this now sort of relatedness stack. You've got a person who may have something I may be interested in the future, who also is interested in this thing that I'm interested in, and maybe you mention a third thing that reminds them of you. It could be something simple, the fact that you're raising kids between 5 and 18. That might be enough to make them feel as though you're a relatable person. So I resemble you in some way. People want to do business with people who remind them of them, because it lowers barriers, makes it more natural. Number 4, and this is an important one, but strangely enough, it's not as important as the first 3. It's that our approach or product is different, and it needs to be for the following reasons. So if you have an approach that you've developed to scratch your market's itch, and you've gone to a lot of trouble to do that, this is one of those areas where you can be really explicit about it. It doesn't really matter, that you're being on the nose in this case. You can be as explicit as you want to be. People should understand why you're different and why it's a huge necessity that you've taken this particular approach. So you can do that as much as you want. Now, what if you're in an industry that is deeply commoditized? Anybody in a business like that, where you think about what you're selling, maybe you're in a highly regulated industry, Sam is, and it's difficult to behave differently when you're delivering value, because there is really only one product and one way of selling that product that is allowed inside of your industry. So if you're in a product like that, or if you're in an industry like that has a product that is commoditized or deeply regulated, I think Brad is in that situation too. Mm-hmm. Refer to the first 3 things, right? Because now the Joe Girard principle there, you're back to selling the best product in the world. It's what your mother told you. There's only one of you. It's very, very difficult.
Thank goodness.
It's very difficult to copy you. Right? No one can do that. If you get your face out there and you are in front of people for this subject matter and you're educating them, no one's going to clone you and scoop away your customers and subvert those relationships. It's impossible. It's very difficult to replicate. So the other thing we want to talk about, in number 5 here, we want to talk about the cost of the alternatives. There's always an alternative. What is the number 1 alternative to doing business with any of us?
Not.
Exactly. Doing nothing.
Doing nothing
is number 1. So the cost of doing nothing, the cost of delay, right? Do we know what that is for our ideal customers? Or the cost of a lower value alternative, right? So can we talk about how, say we're selling guitars, we have a boutique guitar shop, and there's a $2,000 Les Paul. Can you actually explain to me in terms I will understand why buying a $2,000 Les Paul is preferable to buying a $350 Epiphone of equivalent size, color, shape, whatever? Can you do that? Can you demonstrate that? And maybe that's your mission, And I won't go down the rabbit hole on all the reasons why that could be, as I'm not in that business, but you should be able to do that. Explain all those things, and maybe most of the reasons won't matter to them, especially if they're just starting out. Maybe the lower cost option is a gateway to what you're doing, and then you want to add that lower cost option to your value ladder so that they're thinking about you. You were the person who provided them with the introduction that will lead one day to the high-priced Cadillac version of whatever it is that you're selling. So the cost of doing nothing, delay, or lower value alternatives. You want to be able to talk about that. You can do that with stories, case studies, and if you really want to get lurid and gruesome, there's always examples in the news, depending on the business that you're in, where people have done nothing, and this is what that story looks like, just so that they're aware. You know, people respond to stories. We're actually hardwired for stories. So anytime you can deliver any of these ideas in story form, that's great. It's probably the only thing you're going to remember from this is Joe Girard, because that was the story part. So number 6, doing business with you is consistent with their personal values and their existing commitments. So people like to behave in a consistent manner, especially if they've explicitly articulated their values to you in some way. And this is kind of an important thing you can do when you're talking to someone in sales, rather than getting into the nitty-gritty of features and benefits and all that other nonsense. Find out what's important to them. You find out what their values are, find out what personal, professional commitments that they have, maybe what their long-term goals are. And then when you're talking about your features, you're talking about the parts of your value offering, you can always be relating them back to what they have already committed to, and what's already important to them. Because people want to be consistent. And once they know that you know what's important to them, then, and they understand how what you're offering is actually an extension or in support of their highest ideals and commitments and values, you don't really have to sell at all, right? When we're selling, we're not really there to convince them of anything new. We're just telling them how this fits into something they've already committed to. And of course, this applies to the messaging that you put on your website and the messaging that you put on your social media. Now the trick here is that you may have to break some bad habits, and I am really guilty of this. I've had to work hard on it, and my wife has been a big help to me. When I talk with people, I desperately want to jump to the solution. I think part of it is because I'm a guy. You just want to solve. But you need to go deep and figure out what values that they have, previous commitments that your solution is going to be congruent with, because that's going to motivate them more than anything. You know, you're working with them. You see, before that, I was on that side of the table, right? Adversarial, playing ping pong. But as soon as you start talking about their commitments and their values, you change sides. Now you're a partner. Now you're working together. Now they really open up. And in fact, if you really listen, they will give you a perfect roadmap to the sale. It may be that they're a bad fit for you, and that may be something you discover. And that's cool too, because you can use the time you would have spent chasing them for the next 8 months on 10 other customers who may be an excellent fit for you. So it's a good part of your disqualification process as a salesperson. Reciprocation. This is a tricky one here. People feel naturally compelled to do good for those they feel a sense of reciprocity towards. So someone does something nice for you, the free samples in the grocery store, you have a little piece of cheese, and now you're thinking about buying the bigger piece of cheese. And there's examples of that in every business. Free samples, not exactly a well thought out reciprocity idea, because it's not super high value, right? Ideas are actually of higher value, particularly when they're deeply relevant to the person, because they've cost you, as the giver, a lot of attention to figure out what's going to be the most relevant to that person. So don't think about selling or giving away small pieces of cheese. Find out how to deliver the highest possible value. Now, kind of congruent with number 6 on our list here. helping to understand how what you offer is consistent with their values and commitments. You really have to give of yourself and completely surrender to understanding the person, to see if they're a good fit, see what their values are, and find out how what you're saying can be deeply relevant to them. Because when you're delivering something that's deeply relevant, that's the best kind of reciprocity, because you've taken an interest. We love a little bit of interest, don't we? Little kids, if they run all over the place and going crazy, I have a little niece, and they think she has Asperger's, but I don't know. But if I sit down and color with her for 10 minutes, just a little bit of attention, and they level right out. And adults are exactly the same. Ask more questions and find out as much as you can about someone. And you can even notice in a conversation, keep score. See how many statements you make versus how many questions you ask. Try to get it to 75%, just to see how the conversation goes, and see how much further you get in turning that stranger into someone who wants to do business with you. Just for fun. Just try to get up to 75%. It's really hard.
Be interested rather than being interesting, right?
Right.
Is that what that?
Yeah. Like that's what's that?
Don't even know, but I've read it, listened to it somewhere.
Yeah, there's a book there. Strive to be to understand. What is it? How to win friends and influence people. That was one of the principles. Strive to understand rather than be understood, and that will trigger reciprocity, because people are starved for attention. We're all so disconnected. If someone looks you in the eye and says, "How are you?" It's meaningful. And then just as a footnote to that, "How are you?" is such a throwaway thing now. You can create a little bit of pattern disruption by changing it. Try saying, "How's your week going?" Because it forces them out of whatever the pattern that they usually go into when they're asked how they are.
Good.
Yeah, they say good. It's reflexive, isn't it? And they'll tell you, they'll give you very specific answers, and you may actually learn something. So how's your week going, or something like that. So reciprocity. And we can do that in our messaging just by having a deep insight into what the person is actually worried about, right? And how what we deliver will relieve that in some way. Social proof. Now, that is one of those things that's been thrown around so much that it's lost all meaning. So we'll just we'll talk about how to make it more meaningful. We want to demonstrate what other people have done. So the implicit message that we are concealing in everything that we do is, this is what others have done to solve the problem that you have, right? So we can do that with solution stories. We can do it with white papers if our customer is having trouble sleeping. If you want to do it in an interesting way, get in front of the video, in front of a video camera, and tell a story about someone you know who did business with you and how this solved their problem. And if you're interested in doing this more effectively, because storytelling is important, there are some excellent books on how to develop a story and the structure of the hero's journey. Have you heard of this? Where you start out with, you've got this crisis moment, and you can't go any further, and you need to transform as a person in order to move past the problem. That's the hero's journey. Every movie's constructed exactly the same way, where everything is fine until it isn't, and then what happened to solve the problem. And we love those stories because we're always interested in whether or not we will actually be able to do that ourselves, and being reminded that it's possible to move past the current version of ourselves into a new version. Like the person you're leaving this room as will be a tiny little bit different than the person you walked in as, hopefully with some new ideas and some things you can try, and maybe you've thought of something in your business that you can use to move over whatever little hurdle that you're currently struggling against. But that's why the hero's journey is interesting, because we're always going through these cycles in our lives. We're trying to become a new person, and every time we do that, we run across some new obstacle that we could not have possibly anticipated. So tell stories. Case study videos are very effective as well. And the last thing is authority. So are you an authority on your subject? Well, if you've been in your business for any number of years and have committed and dedicated yourself to understanding it, then you are an authority. So the question is, are you behaving like an authority? So think about people who you know in certain spaces who are considered authorities. The word authority actually has the word author in it. So a lot of them are authors, and an easy way to become an author is to just become an author. You don't have to be a great writer. In fact, a good way to break through, you think to yourself, now he's lost his mind, I'm not going to write a book. That's crazy talk. Why don't you write a terrible book? Tell yourself, you know what, I'm going to make it my goal that in 90 days I will have written an awful, awful book about the thing I am an expert about. Because there are two distinct parts to writing literally anything. One is harvesting all the information together and piling it up in some undifferentiated mass of snakes. And then there's the editing part. And those are two distinct areas. People have this funny idea that art or literature or writing comes out fully formed. We think Mozart was just manifesting these complete symphonies out of his imagination, fully formed for all of us to love and enjoy, but that's not how it works. That's a crazy, crazy lie. It has to start, there's two things to it. It's a 1-2 punch. There's creating the terrible version of it, and then there's the editing. And that's why there are editors. It's a profession. And you can be your own editor, but just don't do both of those things at once. So if you're thinking about how to make yourself a more natural choice to a potential audience, and authority is one of the things you've put off or would otherwise disregard, commit to making something terrible in the next 90 days. You say, you know what, it's going to be garbage. And the other thing is that it'll take a lot of pressure off, and there will be segments of your work that will actually be pretty good. When you get back to editing it, it's not that bad. You wake up in the morning and set aside 15 minutes a day for the next 90 days to create something terrible. That will give you till January 25th. Just see what you come up with. And just tack that on your fridge and remind yourself 15 minutes a day. Whatever small increment will get you into it without having to go to war with your personal resistance. So you can be an author, you can be a host. That's a good one. If you find you don't have a lot of confidence, host something. Create a little podcast. I've got one. Brad's been on it. We're going to have our 5th episode soon, so I'm just at the beginning of that too. So that I'm not being too hypocritical. I'm standing here talking to you about making stuff. Be a host. Come up with some good questions, like we talked about earlier. And the other thing is that if you interview people that you would be interested in doing business with, and who are also serving your customers, there is also some built-in reciprocity there that you're creating in a very natural and subversive way, so that maybe down the road they will feel more inclined to do business with you because you've put them out there. That might be another way of doing it. You can also be a connector, put people together. It also works really well when you're being a host. You could perhaps interview 2 people at once or introduce people who may be able to do business together, which also generates reciprocity, or be a curator. So as you're going through your day-to-day rummagings on the internet, you may find things that are excellent and may serve your customers and not necessarily compete with you. They could be alternatives We talked about alternatives to doing business with you, but they may be low-cost alternatives, they may be zero-cost alternatives, they may be alternatives for people who aren't a good fit for you. You think about the people you don't want to do business with, and if you discover one of those, if you had a bunch of alternatives all queued up for them, this isn't good for you, but here's 5 things you can try. Now the beautiful thing about that is maybe that one person who's a bad fit for you knows 5 people who are a good fit. And now you've got this reciprocity thing working for you again. So that's the list. There's a lot of things to think about. If you'd like to have a copy of this list, I can email it to you. Just come up to me afterwards and I'll share my email address with you. There is an excellent book by Robert Cialdini called Influence, where he talks about most of these levers in depth. If you haven't read it already, you absolutely have to put it on your reading list. If you're not much of a reader, if you don't like reading, but you do some driving, get the audiobook. You have to listen to it. It's absolutely essential. So that's my presentation.
Sorry,
Thank you.
what was that book?
It's called Influence by Robert Cialdini.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you very much. If you want to talk about how to develop a thesis in your business, I would suggest having at least a half-hour conversation with me, because we are all so deeply steeped in the hot water of our business. We're all tea bags in our own little cup of tea that we're not even aware of the hot water, right? We're like that goldfish in a bowl. You ever hear that joke where the guy's walking along the river and he says to the fish, "How's the water in there?" And the fish says, "What's water?" Now what makes you unique and interesting and compelling is so much a fundamental part of your day-to-day life, you don't even think about it. So to have someone like myself have a conversation with you, kind of in light of the checklist here, will be very valuable, and I'd be happy to have an introductory conversation with you about that, just to flesh out some ideas and help you get you on your way, and also help you to manage the stuff going forward, because it can be a bit of a hassle if you don't set up a system to keeping it consistent. Thank you very much.
Is there any question or answers?
How soon in the process do you answer the question, or even on a website, maybe better, of price, costs, investment?
Well, it's different for every business, right? If you're creating custom solutions for people, then that has to be a function of what the solution will, what value is delivered by the solution. So if you're in a business like mine, where we're developing marketing solutions, it would be ridiculous for me to tell you what it costs up front until I know what it will, what value it will create. For instance, if I looked at your business and said, listen, I think that given what you've told me so far and the goals you've expressed to me, we can bring you $100,000 of new revenue in the next 12 months. Then I would look at that and say, does it make sense for the solution to cost $10,000, right? So price really has to be a discussion that's all the way down the road if you're in a custom business or a solution business, after you've come to a deep understanding of what value you're actually delivering and how it's congruent with their actual values. And
so when do you start that process? Like right from the beginning, you're establishing obviously their needs. Oftentimes in my business, I'm sure everybody's business is, well, how much is this going to cost me? Unless you're in an explicit business that has all that information that's already out there.
The answer, the flippant answer is that if we do it right, it shouldn't cost you anything.
Right. It's a great
right?
Yeah.
But to do that in a way where you have a clear return on investment, there's a lot of questions I need to ask you. I need to even figure out whether or not I'm a good fit for you.
Sure.
Because I might not be a good fit for you.
Mhm.
In fact, that's really compelling. That little push away. People aren't expecting salespeople to go, I might not be a good fit for you. And I may not be a good fit for any of the people in this room, to be totally honest. You know, it may be, Sam's business may be so ruthlessly regulated that there's no room for any imagination. Maybe. Who knows? Maybe the same thing with Brad. But Brad's doing some pretty interesting things with personal branding, so maybe there is some room for me. I don't know. But, give him a little push, say,
I'm not as ruthless as Sam.
I wasn't saying Sam's ruthless. I'm saying maybe his industry is.
I'm only ruthless the second Tuesday of every week.
Excellent. Right after your shot, right? Okay, so to answer your question, so if you're in a business, a service business where you're providing a custom solution, then there's a lot of kind of posturing and question asking that needs to happen before that, because you're not entitled to provide them with a solution until you know them. Right? Like I don't know Sam well enough to give him dieting advice at all, right? Well, first of all, I'm not in that business, but if I was a dietitian, I can't just walk up to him and say, you need more vitamin C, Sam. I can't do that. I'm not entitled to give you a solution. So, conversely, they're not entitled to a cost because there's no solution. No solution, no cost. How can those two things go together? So it's impossible, right? So there's a lot of stuff that has to happen up front. First of all, you want to make sure that they're going to be worth your time. Go through a specific disqualification process and make sure they understand that's what it is. Because then that differentiates you from the other salesmen who are looking for anybody with a strong pulse. And there's lots of those out there, oh, look, you made eye contact with me, so I'm going to talk to you, right? Yikes, right? Now, if they don't have so many prospects that they're doing some careful disqualification to make sure that they're only serving people who they're uniquely positioned to help, then, maybe there's something else wrong. But anyway, so there's a disqualification process, and then once you realize that they're, not to be glib, but what they're worth your time, and you're worth their time, because it's two-way, right? It's going to be a good fit. Then you can go deep on what they actually need and what their values are, what's important to them, what their what future they're trying to create in their business or in their situation, and then you can discuss in the framework of that how your solution is congruent with everything that their hopes and dreams are. You said this. Well, I know that this will be an important feature to you because of what you said here. You also mentioned that, and this is important. You mentioned this obstacle, and I think you can get around that by you're kind of you're letting them set the tone and the script for what you're saying, and the price ends up being a footnote to that, because if something's completely congruent with your values and your aspirations. Think about all the crazy harebrained things that we've bought over the years. The dumb money we've spent just because it matched with who we feel we are. Right? Just our identity as a human being. I am a Harley Davidson motorcycle driver. What do you call that? Whatever they call it in their tribe. This is what I am. Ergo, $30,000 for a Harley Davidson. That's crazy money. You're never going to see that again. That's not an investment. That's out the window. That's stupid money, But people will do that. People will spend the money so long as it matches with how they see themselves. And if they know you're aware of their identity and you're working to support their identity and their values and commitments, well, it's just such an easy. It's not selling at all, right? You're just laying track. Does that answer your question?
It was very thorough.
Okay. Any other questions?
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Jason.
Thanks for having me. This has been the Zero Noise Marketing Podcast. If you feel like the Zero Noise marketing approach is right for your business, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at zeronoisemarketing.com or give us a call at 888-997-5372. Have a great day.